Is the church's primary goal to convert people to Christianity? This is a question I recently asked more than 500 church leaders, and the responses I got, they surprised me. And so in this video, we'll break down how churches understand conversion and why we need to stop caring so much about it.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Tools, the show to help you share the message of Jesus while we try and navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm your host, Alex Mills, joined as always by Brady Shearer.
I want to begin this episode by putting on the table my thesis for the entire episode.
Okay.
And then we'll work backwards to why that thesis is defendable.
Okay.
So my thesis is this. Simply put, too many churches believe that converting people to Christianity is their primary goal, and this belief causes harm.
Okay, you're coming in hot.
And we also want to present an alternative
Right.
to this being the primary
We're not
goal.
just pointing fingers and be like, well, you guys are pretty wrong about this, so thank you next. See you next week on Pro Church Tools.
Where did this all come from? I asked on my Instagram stories this question. Is the church's primary goal to convert people to Christianity? ? We had 629 people respond. 40% said yes, 60% said no. Of the people that voted yes without revealing their names, 2 of them work at our company, and another works at one of the largest churches in America. I think it's also important to state that my Instagram demographic is not all churches as a whole.
Sure.
This is not a very extensive study that we did. You know, my Instagram demographic is mostly 25 to 34-year-olds. It's a 70-30 split, 70% men, 30% women. And so I was actually pretty surprised that 40% said, yes, our primary goal is to convert people to Christianity. And I don't think it would be too far of a leap to say that if 40% of pro-church nation young folk that have been proven again and again to be more progressive in their beliefs than their parents, if 40% say in pro-church nation that the primary goal of the church is to convert people, it's probably 51% or more if you account it in our parents and grandparents.
I think that's probably a safe assumption.
So, of course, the question that is begged after this question, the follow-up is, well, what do we mean by convert here?
Right.
Because I got one response from a person in Pro-Church Nation, someone who's been following us for years, and it said, of the 60% that said no, what kind of punk said no? Is this a trick question? What else could a church's primary goal be if it isn't conversion? I don't get it. I have a feeling people are splitting hairs or emphasizing a part of conversion, but if not, you got a bunch of heathen followers. To which I responded, maybe I'm the heathen. I would answer no, emphatically. Because there is an important follow-up question here, because we need to define what a conversion actually is.
How do you define conversion? Yeah.
So I asked that question. I said, how do you quantify a conversion? 603 responses. The most prominent, 38%, was basically just the shrugging your shoulders emoji, like, I don't know. And I think my guess would be, we didn't cross-reference this, my guess would be that the majority of those responses came from the people that said, no, our primary goal is not to convert people. But here's where things get really interesting. 33% said that you quantify a conversion by the sinner's prayer. 33%. 25% said you quantify a conversion by a baptism, and 4% said you quantify by church membership. So this is what we have basically. 40%, 2 out of 5 churches in pro-church nation saying that their primary goal is to convert people to Christianity. And then 1 in 3 saying that the way that you prove that to be the case is through the sinner's prayer.
Yeah.
And that's the foundation that I want to start with. Many of the people listening and watching this are going to say, yeah, that seems like a little shallow, a little cheap, like a little trite.
Sure.
But the point I'm trying to make is that at the very least, 1 in 3 churches think that is the best indicator and the primary goal of what our churches are here for. I think this is harmful on a number of levels. Firstly, quantifying a conversion, I believe, is virtually impossible.
I'm sure it is.
I think I know the salvation of my spouse. But we have seen through the last several decades how many people that you think you know turn out to be living a totally different life. You think you know someone, and then you're like, oh, wow, I never would have expected that from them. The Bible says that the heart is deceitful above all things. Humans have an amazing ability to put on a certain face, put on a certain appearance, but be living in completely different ways. And I think that if we were all honest, that really only God knows the destiny, and God knows if we are his or not, right?
Sure. And so if you can't measure that by any sort of, black and white metric, how are you able to evaluate that your church is on the right path? How are you, if your main goal is conversions, how are you able to confirm those to say, okay, yeah, we're doing the right thing, our church is moving in the right direction? It's virtually impossible.
And this is where the sinner's prayer comes from.
Yeah.
Right? Because we have this problem. How do we quantify someone's salvation? Well, we probably can't. I know we'll create something, a salvation script sort of thing, where when someone says this, we'll then check the box. They've made a decision for Christ. But the problem is when you reduce a conversion to a sinner's prayer, for the sake of quantification, that turns following Christ into a transaction, not the lifelong pursuit of taking up your cross, dying to self, following Jesus, but simply repeat after me this salvation script.
Well, I think that the foundation of the sinner's prayer likely comes from the book of Romans, where Paul writes in Romans 10:9, I think it is, where he says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and with your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. Now that word saved, of course, is the word salvation, the one we're talking about. But never once has that word inferred that it's this transactional light switch, if you will, like you were once this, now you're this. But salvation is more like this holistic wholeness that, as Paul makes allusion to later in his writings, is something that you have to work out. Like work out your salvation, like he wrote to Timothy, with fear and trembling. Like it's this process. So of course it's impossible for us to quantify it. And so the roots of this salvation prayer, the sinner's prayer, are noble in that they likely come from that scripture. But it wasn't until, it's hard to track when the sinner's prayer kind of came on the scene, but it was no earlier than the 1500s and likely later on into the 1800s. And so this transactional element of checking that box when somebody does this one thing is, I think, proving to be problematic for the trajectory and the goals, the mission, the value systems of our churches.
Right. So let's recap this kind of progression of harm. Firstly, we have a goal that is not able to be quantified. So then we create something, we manufacture something that is entirely incomplete. It's very transactional. It's not representative of what following Jesus actually is, but we use that as the indicator of whether or not someone is checking the box in the book of life. And then number 3, what that leads to is when a church's primary goal is to persuade people into repeating a salvation script, services become overemphasized and programs are bent towards maximizing salvation scripts. Now, what do I mean by that? If you can have a dark room with loud music and beautiful spotlights and some haze, and you can sing these beautiful songs, these anthems that are highly emotional, and a very persuasive individual can get up there and do some speaking and can tug at the heartstrings, and then you can get someone to repeat after them. You count it down, 3, 2, 1. I see a hand.
To get a ticket into heaven?
A lottery ticket from eternal damnation.
That's a pretty easy choice. I'll say that prayer 100 times, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers have said that prayer multiple times, right? You say it when you're 5, and then when you're 6 and you screw up, it's like, I don't think it took. Like, I'm going to try that again. And it's like, you're 12, you've said the sinner's prayer 100 times. It's like, I'm still not sure this is taking. Like, I'm not sure if it's working here.
The other day, we were at a concert, and you and my wife were standing very stoically throughout the entire concert. Your wife, myself, and my brother-in-law, at one point, for at least 3 minutes, were so hyped up in the middle of this concert, and it was a worship concert, that we were just doing high knees.
You didn't even know that your phone had fallen out of your pocket.
A guy tapped on the back. He's like, dude, you dropped your phone. And I was like, I was doing so many high knees, I didn't even notice. And I'm the person that always is like checking my phone. I'm like, I know where my phone is at all times. Yeah. Not when I was in that worship concert.
You're also not the kind of person to just do high knees. Like, you weren't going into that King's K concert thinking like, I'm going to let loose tonight. Like, these knees are going to get so high.
Yeah.
But it was the atmosphere, right? It was the lights. It was the music. It was the words. It was the silence at some point. It was definitely that cello. And it's like, all of this stuff is happening. It's evoking an emotional reaction, an emotional response from me that is visceral. It's almost, I almost am not giving it permission to happen. And I didn't come here intending for this to happen, but the atmosphere says it's happening. So here we are.
this is important because our entire mandate as a company, what we aim to do is to help churches seize the 167 hours beyond their Sunday services. People are attending church less. The communication shift we're living through has massively shifted our attention. The message has stayed the same, but the mediums through which we distribute that message have and will continue to change. But if we are being forced to overemphasize services because of the sinner's prayer being the most important metric we have to track, because we need to create a metric to quantify the unquantifiable, we have this constant cycle, this circular problem that we can't even get out of because we've created something that should never be a measuring tool because we didn't have a measuring tool, which then overemphasizes something that we need to be moving away from.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. The message is still the same. Salvation in Jesus is still the same. That's what we're here. That's why we do what we do. But as the mediums have changed, we have distilled salvation in Jesus to that altar call moment on a Sunday morning service. And because we've done that, and because that's how we're tracking our church growth, we are putting so much of our effort, our attention, our resources, our money into those moments to make that happen. So
manufacture a moment. Manufacture a moment.
We checked 30 boxes today. What did we do in this service? So we can replicate that and do it again.
So we can justify spending on it
too. And then during the week, when people are supposed to be taking those next steps in that continual process of salvation, they're getting neglected by our churches because we're focused on what we're going to do next Sunday.
I was talking with a pastor just yesterday of a bigger church, and a pastor who has fully embraced the Seize the 167 pro-church tools message. And he was pretty downcast. And I asked him, I was like, what's so wrong? He's like, man, it's just been a tough couple of weeks. And I said, why? He's like, well, we had our Easter service. We had our Super Bowl, his words. And we had like 1% more people than last year. Like, it's bad. Like, we're not moving forward. This pastor said, he's like, it's so hard for me to do my job when I feel like we're not gaining momentum, when we're not growing, when we're not moving forward. And we're not, because our Super Bowl, our Easter service, we had like 1% more people in the seats than last year. And I said to him, I was like, first of all, calling it your Super Bowl to me is really, really weird, because, Pastor, you and I have talked about this a lot. Don't you think that tracking, a holistic approach to someone's discipleship process is more important than butts and seats or saying a salvation script? And he was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess, but this is my emotional response.
Right, like cerebrally, that is what he believes.
Right, and this is the point that I'm trying to make, and what I think this survey, this poll revealed a bit is that we all intellectually agree that, like, a disciple of Jesus, that can't be distilled down to repeat after me this prayer. But our services, our programs, our dollars and our hours spent are being put toward maximizing those moments. And as long as that disconnect exists and persists, we're going to have a problem, especially when you combine that with living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years. It just won't allow for that. We don't have the type of margin for that. How many hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent renting out stadiums and creating these amazing moments? We called them crusades, where we get everyone and we just say, amazing, 1,200 decisions for Christ, and we move on to the next city.
Right.
Like, that model is highly problematic.
Because what about those people?
Hopefully they get connected to a church.
Because it is a step in faith, right? Like that confession, that sinner's prayer is a first move towards becoming a follower of Jesus, towards looking more like Jesus tomorrow than you did yesterday. But like you said, when we're doing these traveling caravans of crusades and 1,200 people say yes, and then tomorrow they want to say yes to life in Jesus, where are you? Right? You're just on to the next city to see if you can get 1,300 the next night. But those 1,200 that you're leaving behind are looking for a way to take another step to work out that salvation, and they're left behind because we're not prioritizing the work, the daily, gritty, dirty, frustrating 2 steps or 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of work of salvation, because it's not as glamorous. We don't get that fulfillment of checking off those boxes and saying, yeah, we're getting more decisions than we did last week.
we do have an alternative method that we want to introduce. It's not the first time we've talked about it, but this was a different way of framing it that I hadn't considered before. And there are a couple of different principles that are the foundation for this new method of tracking. Okay, is our church growing? Is our church moving forward? Are we seeing more people come to Jesus, become like Jesus, becoming more like Jesus? And the first principle is that faith in Christ is a continuum. If you want to use the word spectrum, you can use that word. It's not an on-off switch. And I remember the first time that this was shared with me was in Bible college by one of my professors.
Okay.
And he was saying like, and I was in school for youth ministry. And if there's any place where the sinner's prayer exists, it's youth ministry.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, we have a problem because we create these amazing emotional environments and then we convince these kids, and it's not hard to persuade them to say these sinner's prayer. And then we talk about how, so many people are coming to Jesus. He's like, but faith in Christ is a continuum. And if you imagine like being 100% like Christ on one side, and then, the personification in all forms on the other side, we're all somewhere in the middle. And every time we make a decision, we're moving in one direction or another. And so your job as a leader, a spiritual leader for a student, for an adult, for a child, is to help them in all ways, in all walks of life, keep making decisions like Jesus, to be like Jesus, WWJD. It's not repeating a script. Like that is the most simple, trite thing that it could be. It's about dying to yourself, laying down your life for others, taking up your cross, and these are all done through these decisions every single day, over and over and over again. So that's principle number one. And then principle number two, for our new method of tracking these things, what we think we should replace this conversion moment with, is that our mandate is to make disciples, not converts. A convert has a lottery ticket to heaven. A disciple has a cross to die on.
So good. You're preaching.
It's very easy to repeat a script, especially when you're motivated by the thought that there might be an eternity that is a bad place, and if I say this script, I get out of it. That can't be it. There's no way. If we theologically simply believe that repeating words is what makes a Christian, I mean, that can't be it, because principle number three, this is Jesus' words, you will know them by their fruit.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's what we think is the most important part here. And I know that simply repeating a script isn't it. Like, you need to believe what you're saying as well. And there are obviously multiple sides of this, the once saved, always saved. And we're not trying to get into like different theological emphases. We just think that tracking someone's hand raised or tracking someone repeating a prayer cannot be the primary goal. That cannot be the pinnacle, the be all and end all of what our churches are trying to accomplish, because it completely neglects the 99% of following Jesus. The 1% is saying the prayer in an emotional moment. It's the easiest part. If you were someone who spent their life dedicated to helping marriages thrive, you wouldn't track how many weddings you had seen.
Right.
Like, it's not hard to get married. Like, the hard part is staying married when the bad things happen. The hard part is when you lose a child, when someone cheats, when a betrayal happens, when you expect something to be one way and that person doesn't live up to the expectations you have of them, when you realize, hey, I'm actually kind of a crappy person myself and I'm not contributing to this. Oh, wait, I'm entirely selfish and I only care about my needs and not this other person's needs. And that's where the discipleship process of being married, the loyalty, the conversion part of marriage, that's where that comes in. You used a great analogy earlier about being a part of a gym.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to be more healthy, and so I got a gym membership. And have I been to the gym? No, that's another conversation.
But that's the entire point.
But the thing is, like, I decide I want to be more healthy. I have a goal. And so I got a gym membership. But if I just keep getting more gym memberships to different gyms, but not going to the gym, that doesn't get me anywhere closer towards being more cardiovascularly healthy, right? I have to actually just choose one gym, go to it, and put in the work. And that's what discipleship looks like. That's what salvation looks like. That's sozo, that work of becoming whole. Becoming more whole every day, looking more like Jesus, being more possessed with the Spirit of Christ tomorrow than I am today. And I can't say a prayer and look fully like Christ tomorrow. It's going to be from this day on until my days are over. This process is eternal. It starts today with me. And you can ascribe to, we've talked about the church growth calculator before, this more holistic way of tracking church growth, how your church is growing, and judging it by butts and seats is not the way to do it. You need to track all these different metrics. And you can hear that. You can hear us talk about it, just like this pastor you made reference to, and be like, yeah, That's a great idea. But as long as conversions are your main goal, none of it's going to matter, because that's going to be, when you boil it all down, when you quantify it all down, your goal is going to be, how can we get people to say this prayer based off the data we collected from that poll? And so can you continue to track sinners' prayers? Absolutely. Track it amongst a list of 20 other things, 20 other opportunities to take next steps, because saying that prayer, making that confession is a next step, but it's often the first one. So what comes next? Right? Are you getting baptized? Are you getting injected into a small group? Are you volunteering at a service? Start holistically tracking all these other things. Sure, continue tracking sinners' prayers. But the conversion is not a moment. You said it perfectly. It's not an on-off switch. It's a lifestyle of conversion. It's a lifestyle of laying our life down for the sake of the other, taking up your cross. It's the work of salvation, and there's a better way to track it.
Every morning, I have the opportunity to say yes to Jesus or no. In every decision I make, I have the opportunity to say yes or no. And I can hear some people think, like, hey, Brady, this is all just semantics. I purposefully chose the word primary goal and conversion to Christianity in this poll because I wanted to allow people to opt out because of the uncomfortable language. And I know, because I got the DMs, a lot of people said, no, that's not our primary goal, like conversion. That kind of feels awkward and transactional. Right. And yet, even with that language, 40% said it is. 1 in 3 said the sinner's prayer. That transactional moment is everything. It's the primary goal. And you might think, hey, that's not me. You know, I'm all about like discipleship and this ongoing thing and, you know, revealing, you know, fruit. That's the most important thing. But are you? Right. Because kind of with that conversation I had with that pastor, if you're saying one thing, but then you look at your dollars spent at church and your hours allocated, and it doesn't reflect that, then you don't really believe that. That same thing, you'll know them by their fruit. Alex can say he wants to be healthy all he wants, but if he doesn't actually go to the gym, he's not taking steps.
I'm paying for the membership, but I'm not going.
And I can say all I want that, like, you know, I care about my marriage, but if I continue to not invest time there, that's just lip service, and it doesn't mean anything. And this is the biggest problem. We've got a lot of churches that are saying, yes, I agree, and then spending their money and time elsewhere. So what is this new holistic method? Alex alluded to it. He described it actually pretty well. We have a free Google Doc. It's what we call the church calculator, spreadsheet, growth thing, whatever. It had a fancy name.
Nailed it.
I feel like that fancy name doesn't really work in this case. The point is, there are so many different fruit, next steps, acts that a Christ follower would make, whatever you want to call it, that you can track. And so what we've done with this spreadsheet is we've got about 15 to 20 that we've preloaded in there. Some will make sense for you and your church and what you're doing. Some won't. Again, we want to make room for a ton of different theological emphases. This is so much bigger than that. Here are some that we have on this list. Signing up to volunteer, volunteering at a service, volunteering at a non-service event, signing up for a small group, attending a small group. And there are distinctions here between signing up and then actually going, being baptized, joining a mailing list, following on social media, going on a mission trip, signing up for an event, attending a non-service event, attending a weekend service, attending a midweek service, submitting a prayer request, filling out and returning a new visitor card, giving and tithing. Add to there, if you want, the sinner's prayer. All of these things are indicators of a follower of Christ. Can any of them definitively state, yes, this person is saved? Yes, salvation has occurred. Yes, a conversion has occurred, whatever semantics that you want to use. No. But if we're tracking more than one, if we have 20, and then you add in the ones that make sense at your church, ones that we haven't included here because we don't know the way that your church fully functions and operates, and you have a list of 26 different indicators, and then you weigh them all differently based on their importance. You know, if someone follows your church on social media, that's something. It's probably worth a point. Someone gets baptized, maybe that's worth 100 points. It's like that's more important than following your church on social media. But each of these steps is an indicator. And now, if you weigh them all differently and you add them all up each and every single month, and you look at June and you had this many overall points, and then you look at July and you had this many overall, now you have a more accurate indicator because of your holistic tracking of your church going in the right direction. It is so easy to manufacture decisions, conversions, sinners' prayers, but not actually make an ongoing, long-lasting difference in somebody's life. But if you put something in here, you're going to get a much more accurate indicator. And if you want your church to succeed over the next 10, 15, and 20 years, as our culture has completely shifted thanks to this stupid little phone, you're going to have better targets, because we literally invented a sinner's prayer that is not in the Bible. And sure, we have a verse that can kind of explain why we did it. And we use that to be our main qualifier and quantifier for measuring if our churches are succeeding or not. it's just very inaccurate. And if that's all we have, that's not much to stand on.
So good. I don't have anything to add.
This
to that.
Google Doc is free. You don't have to opt in. We want as many people to use it as possible. Hopefully one day we can build a software that actually does it for free, but it's a Google spreadsheet right now. Gain access to it. Use it. If you have questions for clarification or follow-up, add them in the comments. And thanks so much for watching this episode of Pro Church Tools. We'll see you next time.
Are we heretics? Maybe, but that shouldn't stop you from subscribing.
And if you think we're heretics, like this video.
Don't dislike. You're gonna want it. No, do the opposite. Like it.